Before I bring them up here and formally introduce them, I do want to hand them something in appreciation from us at the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors, because he does pull through. He's probably the only guy that can take really negative information and do a good positive spin on it. So we like, that's going to be
and funny
today.
And funny.
But kind of an appreciation from all of us at the Greater Association of Realtors. I want to award you with this certificate of recognition for all you have done to us and our members and the citizens all over the state and all over the country. Now, God likes to do things a little bit different. We may have, you got the cards on the table, write some questions, but sometimes he'll say, does anyone have a question on that? If you do and you want to raise your hand, I can run, there's 2 mics that can go back and forth. Keep your questions tight, concise, and because we are on a time frame, if he wants to go that direction. If not, we're going to have the question and answer at the end, the last 20 minutes. Give them to Mark, whoever the staff is, like you did last time, and I'll try to get as many as possible. Without further ado, Gav, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm not doing slides. All right. Hi, everybody. Great to see you in person. Some associations are still Zooming. I don't know about you, but I have Zoom fatigue. Do you have Zoom fatigue? So it's good to see you guys. A great audience. I always look forward to this. I haven't been here for, I guess, 3 years or so. And as always, good time of year to do it, early in the year, to find out about the new laws. And I'm also going to talk about new forms, too, because I think that's important to know. Because the new laws just took effect about a month ago, and the new forms just came out a little before that, and they sort of interact sometimes. So it's good to know what's going on. As Frank said, if you have questions, you can just sort of interrupt any time, I guess. You can even yell them out, or you can wait for the microphone to come talk to you. That'd be fine. So what's going on here? New laws. I know Sanjay was just talking, but I know a lot of you were in breakout, so maybe you didn't see him. I don't know if he mentioned that the governor signed 997 laws.
Wow.
I'm going to talk about no, I'm not going to. There's almost like hardly any this year that you need to talk about, because there would have been a lot of laws to talk about if the certain laws got proposed, but they didn't get passed, right? I mean, there were a lot of bad laws that were proposed that never got passed. And that's basically thanks to you guys collectively, and Sanjay particularly, his group, because their main job, I think, in Sacramento is killing the bad laws. And how did they kill bad laws? By the way, what were some of the bad laws that got proposed this year? There was a law that was going to say,
Rent control.
if you bought a house and sold it within 3 years and you weren't living there, you have to pay a 25% tax on any profit. That wouldn't have been good. There was a law that was going to require you to, offer the property to the tenants first. There's all sorts of landlord-tenant laws, a statewide rental registry, this questionnaire you'd have to fill out if you rejected a tenant. You'd have to have an energy efficiency audit every time you had a vacancy, restrictions on rent control being harder to fight rent control throughout the state, all sorts of bad laws. And basically none of them passed. and why would they not get passed? Yes, thank you.
Because of government affairs.
Thanks, Sanjay. So how do we stop bad laws from getting passed? I mean, I'm not going to tell you that, that's Sanjay's department, but I know obviously they have great intelligence and wisdom and very persuasive powers. But it also takes money, because Sanjay, don't they always want to know how much we contributed to their re-election campaign, right?
You can't say that.
You can never say that, of course. Right. I don't say that officially. But anyway, but the point is, when the association asks you for political contributions, I mean, I know you pay some as part of your basic dues, but you should always try to contribute more. The more money we have, the more people we can bribe. I mean, contribute to. just unofficial. Just kidding, Sanjay. But anyway, he's not listening. We did have a good. Sanjay had a great year, and as Sanjay just told me, all the bad laws I just mentioned have been reintroduced.
Of course, yeah.
They got to fight them all over. It's an ongoing battle, but we do pretty well. well, considering often we're the only entity fighting certain laws, right? So, okay, all right, let's talk about the laws that did get, are there any laws you should know about that actually did get passed? And there are a few, maybe 10, I'll go over those first, okay? Let's talk about just basic realtor stuff. The only new one I think worth mentioning is, you know, to get a broker's license, you first have to be an agent for 2 years or have a college degree in real estate. New law says if you're going to use the 2 years as an agent prerequisite, those 2 years have to be within the last 5. So if someone was an agent 10 years ago for a few years, dropped out of the business, they come back, hey, I'm going to be a broker this time. No, you're not. You got 2 more years as an agent because you didn't have those 2 years within the last 5. Okay? The other thing that took effect this year is education. When you renew your license this year, you're going to have to take a new class on implicit bias, and the fair housing class has been beefed up. You're still going to have the same number of hours, but they're slightly different. Okay? All right, let's talk about the rental area. I said there are a lot of bad laws that didn't get passed. Any laws of interest do get passed. By the way, big picture. The main thing I was talking about the last 2 or 3 years was the eviction moratorium, and you know that's over, right? But it's, by the way, you should be glad you're not a landlord in Los Angeles County, because it's not over there. They keep extending it in the city of LA. But just be happy you don't have that here. But you may have local laws. I always tell people pay attention to local rules. I don't know if any cities in this county have their own particular rules. We don't really track that carefully, but you should be aware of that. Also be aware, we haven't talked about it in the last couple of years because we've been talking about the pandemic, but remember there's something called there's California Rent Control, the Tenant Protection Act. Remember, if you've got a rental property that is more than 15 years old and 3 or more units, or a duplex that's not owner-occupied, you're under California rent control. And that limits who you can evict, what reasons you have, and it also limits how much you can increase someone's rent. This year it's 10%. So I know a lot of you guys are probably landlords yourself. Some of you may be property managers, or you just have clients who are landlords and they ask you questions, right? You gotta be very careful. Don't be the expert unless you are their property manager, in which case they expect you to be the expert. Always get legal advice, tell them to get legal advice, because when they ask you a simple question, can I evict this person? How do I evict them? It's not a simple question. It may depend on what type of property it is. It may depend on where the property is, okay? Because the California Tenant Protection Act limits the reasons you can evict, in addition to the fact that it limits how much you can increase the rent, okay? So what if, speaking of rent increases, what if I'm exempt from local rent control, I'm exempt from California rent control because I have a single family home or a newer building? Can I increase the rent as much as I want? Not right now, you can't. Why not? Did you know the entire state of California is in a state of emergency?
Yes.
Did you know that?
Yeah.
Did you know we're in 2 states of emergency? One's related to the storms, one's related to COVID. Neither one is over yet. Did you know when you're in a state of emergency, you're subject to the anti-rent gouging laws? So how much can I increase the rent under the anti-rent gouging laws? Anybody know? 10%, which is the same number you can increase under California rent control. So no landlord in California can increase rent by more than 10%. Some people, if you're in LA or something, it's a lot less than that. Bottom line, I don't even want you to memorize all this stuff. I want you to just be aware that it's complicated. Another thing, we just had a webinar with an attorney who defends people against the Department of Real Estate. She said the number one thing that DRE is looking at now is realtors doing property management. So you make sure if you're gonna do property management, you gotta do it right, especially the trust fund accounting rules, but just in general. It's a complicated area of the law. I'm not trying to scare you from doing this. I want you to do property management, but it's just not simple. It's not, for the last 3 or 4 years, it's gotten levels of complexity, okay? Are there any new laws you should know about? One of them, there's a new thing called a reusable tenant screening report. If you're a landlord and have a vacancy, Can you charge that tenant a fee to screen them, to screen their application? Yes. Is there a limit to how much you can charge them? Yes. How much is the limit as of right now? No one's gonna know the answer. It's $52.46. It's a nice round number. Why is that? Because it started out of a cap of $35, then it increases by inflation each year. So it's never, and it hasn't increased yet from last year's inflation, so I'm sure it'll go up to like 60, who knows? The point is, if you're a tenant applying to a lot of places, this can add up, right? So the new law says a consumer agency can produce a reusable tenant screening report that has all the things you want, you know, the eviction history and the rental history and all that stuff, and then the tenant can use it at multiple applications over a 30-day period. Okay, so maybe saving the tenant money. Landlords, though, don't have to accept this. But we're thinking that landlords probably will. It's going to be a certified good report. They don't have to get their own, but they could theoretically ask for their own screening report as well and charge their own fee, okay? But if they accept the reusable tenant screening report, they can't charge a fee for that, okay? The other law regarding rentals, I think, is a bit more controversial, and it's, I don't know, it may even get challenged in court. It's on the area of domestic violence. Okay, but the law previous to this year said if a tenant says to the landlord, you know, I'm a victim of domestic violence here. I know I signed a lease, I know I have 10 months to go, but you need to let me out of this lease. The situation I have is bad. And current law, old law, still law, if they can produce either some type of restraining order or some type of police report, the landlord has to let them out of the lease. Okay, so that's old law. Here's the new law. The new law says now a tenant can go to the landlord and say, you know, I'm in a domestic violence situation, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to evict the bad person. I'm staying, but you need to kick out the bad guy. Oop, did I say guy? The bad person, right? So that's sort of the same criteria. If you can produce a police report, restraining order, or there's actually a new thing of any reasonable sort of documentation, like from a victim advocacy group or something like that. If the tenant can produce that, then the landlord actually has to evict the alleged perpetrator and change the locks. So this is going to cause some issues, I'm sure. I think if you're ever in one of these situations, you should probably get legal advice before you decide what to do next. But this is an important new law, and there's a $5,000 penalty if you violate this law. So you don't want to be in violation of this law. Of course, the court could say to the victim tenant that if you let the bad person back in, you have to, that's grounds for you to be evicted. Because unfortunately this happens sometimes. They forgive them, let them come back. Well, that would be grounds to evict. Terminate the whole tenancy, right? But in general, like under old law, the landlord could basically say, well, yeah, I'll let you go, I'm gonna terminate the whole tenancy. Or there even been cases where the tenant didn't want to go, and the landlord said, there's domestic, that's grounds. I'm gonna terminate this tenancy because someone in this property has been doing domestic violence. So now that the landlord cannot evict the victim unless the victim allows the alleged perpetrator back in. Okay? Kind of complicated, but who knows, there could be some legal challenges to this, but it's an interesting new development that I think you should all be, just once again, landlord-tenant law is complicated. Okay? All right. So we talked about licensing type stuff. We talked about landlord-tenant. There's a whole bunch of laws passed this year that we supported that I'm not really going to get into, trying to make it easier to build housing, easier to convert formerly commercial property to residential property, all sorts of things. I'm not going to get into details. A couple things you might be interested in is, I know there was a breakout session on ADUs that some of you were in, and I'm sure you probably talked about this, but it's sort of easier to build accessory dwelling units than it was before. Do you know, and here's the background on this. Remember a year ago, remember what the most controversial new law was? SB 9. Remember that? where I got a single family home, under SB 9, I can add another property on that same lot. And sometimes I can even do a lot split and put 2 on each. So I can convert my single family house to a 4-plex, basically. And we thought this was gonna revolutionize, or some people thought this might revolutionize the whole state. Do you know no one's been doing this?
10.
They haven't been happening
10.
throughout the state? What'd you say?
10.
10?
Yeah.
10 in the whole state?
San Diego, I heard.
10 in San Diego. I think it's maybe 100 or 2 in the whole state. It's not been happening. By the way, why isn't it happening? Do you know there are a lot of obstacles, though, either under SB 9 to build something, like if you're in an earthquake zone, flood zone, fire zone, you can't necessarily do it. Well, that's half the state right there. The homeowner association could say no. Landmark district, historic district, protected habitat district, all these areas you can't do it in general. And even if you can do it, there are limitations, like on size limitations like that, 800 square feet. So it's not, it didn't really take off. But the alternative of doing an ADU is a lot easier. You pretty much have an absolute right to do an ADU. You have an absolute right to do 2 ADUs. You can have a separate ADU and a junior ADU converting existing space. HOA can't stop you. Doesn't matter if you're in an earthquake zone or one of these zones. So that's becoming a lot more common. And now it's even easier. New law says, all right, you still have to, the point of saying when I say you can do it, you still have to meet the building code safety restrictions, but there's no discretion on the part of the city or the county, the HOA, just to arbitrarily say no. But you still have to apply to get the permit to do it. The new law says any government agency responsible for that has to respond in 60 days. Okay? Plus they can be bigger than they used to be. The rule used to be they can't be bigger than 16 feet high. Now if it's attached, it can be 18 feet high. If it's detached but within a half a mile of a transit stop, it can be 18 feet high. Okay? If it's attached, it can be 25 feet high. So you should get quicker answers and build them bigger. And the law also says, yes, a setback can be required, but the setback requirement can't be so big that it basically makes it impossible to build. So speaking of ADUs, let's say you or your client is having an issue. I want to build an ADU, but I'm getting pushback from the city, pushback from the county, pushback from the HOA. Do you know we have attorneys now on staff whose sole job really is suing cities and counties to make them follow the housing rules, follow their own rules.
Good.
And unlike the hotline attorneys like me, you know how nice and friendly we are?
Yeah.
These are mean attorneys we have. These are pit bull, aggressive, mean attorneys. The cities are scared to death of them. So anyway, the point is if you are running into a problem, call us. And if it's relevant, we'll turn it over to the mean guys. And don't tell them I said that, but anyway, and you may have an option. You may have some recourse, because at the very least, cities should follow the rules when they approve things, right? In general. But ADUs have sort of been the biggest area that they've been working on, okay? Here's another interesting one. You have a house, it's a 2-bedroom house. I want to turn it into a 3-bedroom house. Not by adding on to it, but by reconfiguring the inside. New law says, city or county doesn't have discretion to say you can't do it. I mean, you can't require a hearing to approve that. I mean, pretty much if you follow the building code, you can do it. Now, by the way, Sanjay's probably thinking to himself, I'm oversimplifying a lot of this stuff. I want you to get the big picture. And if you want details on anything I talk about, call the legal hotline. And we also have a handout on our website. I think it was linked on your code there that explains all this stuff. I'm giving you sort of big picture, but everything I'm saying is true, okay? I'm not making stuff up, right? Random stuff. Oh, REOs. Okay. There's a new law that says, unfortunately, we're probably going to come back to have some more REOs than we've had recently. So bank foreclosed, they want to resell it. For the first 30 days it's for sale, they can only accept offers from people who want to live there or certain nonprofit groups, okay? So They can't sell to investors in the first 30 days. The idea being to give a favoritism to people who actually want to live there. Another related law says REOs that are big, they do at least 175 foreclosures a year, they can no longer sell off their properties in bulk.
Good.
So you got this big company, they foreclose, okay, we're selling the following 10 properties. You gotta buy all 10. Not anymore. They have to sell them one by one. I mean, who can buy 10 houses at once?
Another bank.
Big investors, not the individual who actually wants to live there, okay? So that's interesting law. I'm almost done with the new laws. Random stuff. I don't know if any of you guys deal with mobile home parks. There's a new law that says the mobile home park manager actually has to be certified. I don't mean to an insane asylum, I mean certified that they actually have taken a class and understand the mobile home laws and the mobile home rules. So that's a good thing, that's a positive thing. Homeowners associations. Let me ask you a question. Can an HOA prevent you from renting out your property?
Yes.
The rule is HOAs have to allow at least 25% of the properties to be rented out, okay? 25%. So if you're in a 100-unit building and you want to rent it out, so far there's only 20 of them rented out, the HOA couldn't stop. But if the 25 were already rented out, they could say no. New law says if you're only going to rent out a portion of your unit, it doesn't count towards the 25%. You pretty much have an absolute right to rent out a portion of your unit, okay? Speaking of that, HOAs do have the right to prohibit short-term rentals of less than 30 days. All right? All right. So we talked about a lot of random stuff here. I don't think anything I've talked about is going to dramatically change your life. People say, you know, I'm good at giving you bad news in a good way. Well, I didn't really have to. Nothing I told you was really that bad. So that's all good. As I said before, as Sanjay just told me, we have to fight it all over again next year. Hopefully none of those bad laws will get passed again, so next year I'll have another happy speech to give you, and nothing too terrible, all right? All right. By the way, I mentioned the DRE a little bit. It's always good to know what's up with the DRE. You may have had a breakout session on this, I don't know, but like I said, we talked to the people at the DRE. I just did a training session for the whole DRE lawyers and investigators and enforcement people. So it was good. I indoctrinated them into our opinion of things. That was good. But anyway, it's good to know what they're focused on. I mentioned before, number one focus, property management. Another big focus, they said, broker escrows, right? Remember there's 3 types of escrows in California. There's the Northern California Title Company subsidiary. There's the Southern California Independent Escrow Company. But then, if you're a broker, with just your DRE license, you can do escrows. But only on transactions where you have one side or the other. But they are, says the DRE, a lot of brokers aren't necessarily doing them right. So they're really auditing and focusing on broker escrows, so be aware of that. And of course they say the same old thing. We really, here's what they hate, the commissioner hates. They hate what they call rent-a-brokers. That's when, you know, you just random, you know, brokers who don't properly supervise, right? And, you know, a good way to find out if you have a rent-a-broker, you call up, you know, they'll call up a real estate office and say, we'd like to speak to the broker. And the agent says, I'm not sure who that is. You know what I mean? I find that a good thing. So be aware that the focus of the DRE is and always has been supervision of agents, supervision of offices. And it's harder now to do this because they're not black and white rules about what constitutes good supervision. Some of you guys have been around a long time like me. Remember when you had to initial as a broker every page of every document? That's not a requirement anymore. But that doesn't mean, oh, I can do whatever I want. You still have to have a system in place. So if you ever have a complaint against you or someone files a complaint against you or the DRE just randomly audits you, make sure you can show the DRE you have a system. This is who reviews each transaction, this is how we review it. And make sure, they say you should have one person at least responsible for file management. And make sure you know what to keep in the files, okay? But there's no list anywhere. So, if you have any questions, call us up. Here's a question. Do you have to keep emails in your file? Yes, emails in the transaction. What about text messages? Do you have to keep text messages for your file? You can read the regulation to interpret it as, well, those are kind of things that don't fit the definition because they don't last long, whatever. But then what we're told is, if the main method of communication you have in a transaction is text, you better keep all the text. Anyway, broker supervision is a big topic. Another big topic is fair housing. Another thing that makes your life challenging to be a realtor and a property manager in California, challenges you have that other states don't have. Fair housing is a good one. You can't discriminate if someone's a member of a protected class. Under federal law, you know how many protected classes there are? 8. Race, religion, colors, and country of birth, age, gender, disability. Anything else you can discriminate. And a lot of states are like that. California has 24 categories.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Look at the fair housing addendum that's part of the purchase contract, part of the listing contract, and list them all. I think the recent one that's causing the most issues is source of income. In the good old days, that was not a category. So you are a landlord, you have an applicant, and you could ask the applicant, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a lawyer. I'm not renting to you. Because I hate lawyers. That was legit and reasonable, but it's not the case anymore. Not only can you not reject lawyers, you can't reject people just because they have a rental subsidy like Section 8. Did you know every landlord in California is now a Section 8 landlord? Every single one. Does that mean I have to take the Section 8 tenant? No, you can still screen people. You can still reject people for objective reasons like their credit score, income history, eviction history, etc. But if your best candidate is objectively on most objective criteria is a Section 8, and you take someone who's not a Section 8, who doesn't have the same objective criteria, that's going to look bad. And they've hired testers, as has the real estate department. We're told they just call people up. Oh, you have a vacancy. We're just wondering, do you take Section 8 tenants? Maybe they call a landlord and hasn't heard about this, and they say, no, I'm sorry, I don't do Section 8. That landlord is dead. I mean, they're just basically admitting they violate the law. So what do you do when you get that phone call? Do you take Section 8? You say, Section 8? I love Section 8. They're my favorite tenants. In fact, I only take Section 8. No, that's discriminating as people who don't have a subsidy. Don't say that. All right. A couple more things and we'll leave the DRE. Another issue is they put in a bulletin, and anytime the commissioner puts it in a bulletin, he means he's serious. He says, realtors, when you're asked to refer a licensed contractor, before you make the referral, check and see they actually have a license, and also check and see if they have workers' comp. And if they're just like realtors, if they have at least one person working for them, they have to have workers' comp. So you have to go to the Contractor State Licensing Board website, cslb.ca.gov, license check, put the name in, make sure that they have the license, and make sure that they have workers' comp for their people. Okay? One more thing.
Say that one more time.
The website, I think that's what you're asking, right?
Yeah.
CSLB.
From the beginning.
Oh, she's taping me here. You better not sell that anywhere. I'm just kidding. When you ask to refer licensed contractors, verify they have a license and workers' comp, and this can be done at the Contractor State Licensing Board website. All right, last thing on the DRE is the commissioner made a statement on a webinar. It got a lot of attention. It was kind of a big issue, and then we pushed back and asked for some clarification, and they backed off a little bit. The whole issue of open houses, right? The question is, you work for broker number 1, you have a friend who works for broker number 2, and your friend says, can you do an open house for me this weekend on my listing? In other words, can you do an open house on a listing that's not within your company? And the commissioner made a point of saying on this webinar, he doesn't think you should do that. You know, that's a bad idea. Why? Because you can only do licensed work for your own broker, and when you're at an open house, inevitably you're going to be engaging in licensed activity. We pushed back, they backed off, they basically said, we're not saying you can't do it, but you have to understand, right? If you're doing an open house, people that come to the open house assume you work for the company that has the for sale sign there, right? The listing office. They assume that's who you are. And if you start doing licensed activity, you know, under the thing that that's who you work for, you're not allowed to do that. So I guess what they're really saying is you have to educate people. When they come to the open house, if you're not the listing office, tell them. I am not here representing the house or the seller. I am here as an agent, an independent buyer, potential buyer's agent. Just like I would show you any other house as a buyer's agent, I can show you this property as a buyer's agent. I am not the seller's agent. I'm not the listing agent. But also be careful about your E&O, your errors and omissions. Does it cover you for problems that can happen at an open house if it's not your listing? Because you know at open houses sometimes things go wrong. People damage things, steal things, get hurt. And an open house, unlike a regular showing of a buyer, you can't watch everybody, and things could go wrong. Who's going to get blamed if something bad happens? The agent who's there. Especially if so the listing broker, I'm talking to listing brokers, you might have a risk there of allowing agents from other offices, and the agent and the broker of the agent who's actually doing it may have an issue there too. Just think about E&O. Yes?
How would that impact the seller if they allow another broker that is not their listing agent for the RLA?
Yeah, I mean, the question I'm being asked is, what about the seller? I mean, I don't think that's a big of a deal. I mean, sellers understand that buyers' agents are going to be coming to their house to show it. Is it really fundamentally different that there's a buyer's agent already at the open house showing buyers who show up? I mean, I think the seller needs to be aware of this. I think the listing agent needs to tell the seller who's going to be there, and I'm allowing other people to do that. So we're not saying you can't do it, just be careful, think of the issues, etc. All right, let me move on. Here's an area of controversy, and I'm talking about sort of forms issues. The whole issue is, you've probably heard, I'm sure you have, that there are these big lawsuits going on nationwide regarding